Hi there, and welcome to our ongoing video series, ESG Acronym to Action. And so today I'm really pleased to be joined by Shawn Hubbard of Hubbard HSE Consulting, a division of the PowerStar Group. We're very excited to have Shawn come on board, but it's important that as ESG becomes a more critical component of our companies and our organizations, as you've heard me talk about in other videos, that there's a temptation to lump in often HSE with ESG. And so I'm bringing on a guy who really knows this a lot better than I do. Shawn has a lot of credentials in this area. And so Shawn, great to have you with us. Tell us, what is HSE?
Well, HSE is a framework that businesses use to help develop their health, safety, and environmental behavior as their business, in the way they do their business.
Okay.
Health being how they deal with hazards in the workplace, how they deal with scheduling and how work-life balance for people, benefits and things like that. Safety is how people work within the company, in the facilities, deals with PPE and workplace hazardous materials, and transport, TDG as well. And environment is how they respond or react to environmental issues within their company.
Okay. So on HSE, is it safe to say it's less about sort of a corporate vision or mission per se, and there's a lot of regulation, right, in and around the concepts of HSE. Talk to that for a bit, because I want to go on to our concepts of ESG, but I think it's important to really define the HSE side and the regulatory.
Right. Well, HSE, a lot of companies, they do have that in their mission statements.
Yeah.
They want to protect the environment. They want to protect their people, and they want to make their businesses have a positive outlook for the community.
Okay.
And
the employees.
And
right?
the employees.
And the
yes.
employees are the stakeholders in the company.
Yeah, the stakeholders in the company.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So on health, for instance, obviously there's some esoteric things that you can talk about in terms of the company and the corporate mission, but are there actual regulations then in terms of health rules or that companies have to follow? You will know some of those. So.
Yeah, the regulations, you have hours of service regulations for your transportation. You have to make sure that your company maintains a certain amount of safety practices. You have to have a manual and a safety safety culture. Needs to be
so when the sign says 1,000 days without an injury or whatever,
right,
that's something then that would go right to the heart of HSE.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, that's something that it's a goal.
Yeah, there's goals and targets, but then there's also the government or organizations will set the rules of what you have to have in terms of safety or whatever on the site. On the job site.
And they're reporting as well. So there's that's a recordable incident rate too as well.
Okay.
So they don't want to have too many of those, and it's important to display that, and it gives employees kind of a goal to shoot for as well. When you're driving into a facility and you see that sign and it says there's 3,000 days, well, maybe you're gonna try and be a little bit more safer when you go in there, because you don't want to be the guy that breaks that.
I was going to say, you don't want to be the one to break the winning streak. That's one winning streak you don't want to lose.
Yeah.
Okay, so now obviously in terms of that, like you say, there's the goal side. Now, we've often heard it talked about companies sort of self-regulating themselves, right?
Right.
Give me some thoughts on that in terms of HSE. do you see that you've had a lot of years of credentials and stuff in
Right.
this side? Have you seen that change where companies are actually starting to monitor themselves, or do you think that it's still critical we have these regulations or whatever in place?
Well, companies mostly do a good job of policing themselves. I mean, it's important to have, say, you know, a government oversight as well, because, you know, some companies just do the opposite.
Right.
You know, and you know, I don't think there's a lot of them doing that. It's not very prevalent, you know. But you know, if there's room for them, some will.
Have you seen it change?
Yeah, I've seen it change quite a bit, you know, and most companies don't want to have, you know, government poking around if they don't have to, and as long as, you know, they do their due diligence and they keep their safety programs, you know, up to date and well implemented, they won't have that problem, right?
Yeah.
Because most of that time, you don't get these government intervention until there's an incident of some sort.
And you bring up an important point, I think, and that's that you can have the binder, right, that has all the things and everybody. Remember, okay, yeah, there's 50 things we have to do our pre-checks and all the rest of it. But if you're not implementing that, then you've got a great looking binder without actual implementation, right? Okay, so now we talked about this before. As you know, we talk a lot about ESG, which is environment, social, and governance. Now, obviously, there's two letters in the acronyms that are the same, HSE and ESG. What my sort of experience in industry so far has been, I think that there's definitely beginning to be more of a meeting of the minds on the E of HSE and the E of ESG, right?
Right.
Because, and I know, you know, your experience will say, environment at one point in time was far more regulatory, right? Then now it's becoming actually something that companies believe in and want to do.
Yeah, you're right. Like the environmental in HSE is more of a operational side, what they're doing, and whereas the E of ESG is what their behavior is, you know, and how they feel about
their philosophy.
Their philosophy,
yeah. Okay.
You know how they prefer to go to renewable sources for their energy, or you know they're proactive with their environmental programs, and they donate to, you know, environmental initiatives in the communities and things like that. So
now your experience, and I know we've had this discussion before, just dumping ESG into the HSE department, not always the best plan. So tell us why, because I think, you know, you and I share a lot of similar vision on this. But.
Yeah, well, with the environmental thing, you know, it's all very good, but social of the ESG is very important, and as well as the governance part of it. And that's different from the HSE, because when you have safety, well, you have to have your PPE program in place. You have to have your maintenance schedules, you know, and things like that.
And those are really very, well, I think you said it, it's very operational, right? Whereas the E of ESG and the S and the tends to, again, be speaking more to the corporate philosophy, and like we say in the videos and in the book, it's corporate DNA, right? And so that you do that without thinking about it, and you do it without having to be told to do it. And I think that's a very important point. And, you know, I haven't even thought about it framed like that, that companies are taking more of a proactive approach because they don't want the government to be the overreach and always trying to figure it out. I haven't thought about that, but that's actually a good point that you've brought up, right? Is because, we don't want the government dictating what we do, so why don't we just do it better, right? And I
Well, and there's also public input on that too. People don't like to, they don't want to be, smelling some H2S plumes coming into their into their communities. They don't want to see spills, and they don't want to hear about ducks flying into their ponds and that kind of thing either. The public is very concerned, and they're very attuned to what's going on in their communities as far as what the corporations are doing.
Would you? I think I know the answer, but you've probably seen that change a lot too, right? Where at one point in time, HSE wasn't even really a thing, but okay, it's jobs, it's economy, it's all those things, which is great. But I think, again, like we probably would see eye to eye on that, in that I think that the public's view of things, like you say, spills and smells and everything else is certainly heightened. Probably because of the internet. And some of the, more information is available to us a lot quicker,
for sure.
right?
The fracking of opposition would be a prime example of that.
And like you said, and I think that's really important, you sort of detailed the fact that you have to report, right? So there's, whatever report number, whatever it is, has to be filed, right? And I guess that becomes public knowledge too, right?
They can access that.
Okay, that's good. Okay, so we see that it's critically important not to be lumping ESG into HSE.
Right.
Okay. How can we help companies then define what those two things are? Are there some tangible ways then that we can begin to look at HSE from your perspective, and then how we can then make sure that we're also addressing ESG at the same time? Well,
I would say that as far as HSE concerns, that's a safety culture issue. So if you're a corporation and you have a good safety culture, whereas everybody, all the stakeholders are on the same page, they all have buy-in all the way from the C-suite down to the employee frontline worker. That's a good marker of social and awareness there and governance, because they're doing that, and it's very positive in the community for that.
Would you then, I think I've heard the term audits or whatever, HSE audit, is that then something that can help? So I think that's an interesting point. HSE is almost the starting point for ESG, right? If you don't have an HSE culture, the chances of jumping then all of a sudden to an ESG culture are probably a lot less.
That's the foundation is HSE, so you got to have that.
That's a good marker. So do you do an audit, or how do you go about figuring out what that safety culture, or what that HSE?
Well, you would go in and do an audit. You could see, if you looked at their total recordable incident rate, if it's a little higher, you'd look at how well they implement their safety program. If there's a consistency from the top down, if the employees, you see them out in the field, if they're all wearing their PPE, if they're fully suited up, and they're following all the procedures, they're doing the right thing. You can see that. If they're not, well, then you get
well, and like you say, if you can't even start at a starting point because there's no culture there, then it's going to be very difficult to break through and start to look at a corporate DNA perspective.
Right.
So again, I think you and I share a lot of the same views on this, but that's why this is so critical, I think, is that we look at the concept that ESG can't just necessarily be lumped in with the HSE side. And it's not to say that they can't do it, but it's just an assumption that we're just going to throw this on to the health and safety department. It's not probably the best way to be focusing our attention. But that's a really great point, is we've got to start with a culture of safety. We have to start with a culture of HSE before we can even think about what the next steps are to incorporating that into our DNA. Shawn, it is absolutely great having you on board. It's been good having the interview, and I know that your work with Power Start Group is going to be very valuable, and doing the audits and the pre-work and all the things that have to go into helping those companies have that starting point and foundation. Great to be with you. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
You bet. Appreciate it.